Thank you, Noel, for that really very excellent and comprehensive introduction. This report will actually be something of a supplement to that, going into more detail and historical context. And I think that this is really what's essential and what's missing in so much of political life. There is immense anger, as was made clear by the demonstrations over the weekend. We saw, I'm sure many of you were there, a line of people snaking from the Detroit Institute of Arts to Campus Martians, back, both ways across Woodward, as part of demonstrations throughout the state, in dozens of cities and towns throughout the country, in basically every major city. There is enormous opposition, but this opposition is, at this point, lacking in historical consciousness, lacking in an understanding of what the issues are in the struggle against Trump and the struggle against oligarchy. Of course, in the course of the past 2 months of the Trump administration, it's become undeniable that, in fact, the United States is governed by an unaccountable financial oligarchy. But what does that mean? What is the significance of this? What is the connection between oligarchy and dictatorship? What is the connection between oligarchy and war? What is the connection between oligarchy and the genocide in Gaza? These are the themes and questions that we're going to be addressing in this report, which will seek to provide historical and political context and frame the question of, as Noel invoked, what is to be done, the burning question of our time. Now, in the spirit of invoking Vladimir Lenin, as Noel did, I think it's worth looking at developments that have taken place over the past 2 months of the Trump administration in context of the basic analysis of what the Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin characterized as the essential characteristic of his time, writing in the early 20th century, and we would argue in our time. Lenin argued that we are in the imperialist age, and that this imperialist age is in fact an objectively necessary highest stage of the capitalist system. That war, dictatorship, attacks on democratic rights, and the immiseration of the working class are not policies that are entered into simply by choice by one or another government, but are in fact objective characteristics of the present socioeconomic period. As he wrote, imperialism is a specific historical stage of capitalism. Its specific character is threefold. Imperialism is monopoly capitalism, parasitic or decaying capitalism, moribund capitalism. The supplanting of free trade by monopoly is the fundamental economic feature, the quintessence of imperialism. But this, Lenin explained, is coupled with the drive for colonies, the increase of inner imperialist antagonisms, the redividing and dividing of the world between the imperialist powers, the imposition of dictatorial forms of government. All of these classic forms of imperialism are manifesting themselves in violent and acute form in the United States in the personification of the Trump administration. Now, Biden, responding to the inauguration of Trump and the fact that there were 5 of the wealthiest men in the world, in the United States and in the world, because 9 out of the 10 of them are Americans, he said that the United States was becoming an oligarchy. At that point, Trump had been in office for something like 2 weeks. How did the United States suddenly become an oligarchy? Of course, over the Obama administration, over the Biden administration, social inequality had risen precipitously under conditions of continuous bailouts of the banks and pro-corporate policies that led to a continuous decline in the standard of living of the working class. And what we're going to argue today is that Trump does not simply speak for himself. He speaks for the essential characteristics of American capitalism. He speaks for the drive to dictatorship, colonies, the subjugation of smaller countries, genocide, ethnic cleansing. All of these characteristics are not, in fact, the incidental attributes or one or another stage of capitalism, but in fact, its most essential characteristics which find expression in periods of acute crisis. And we are living in just such a period of acute crisis. Now, we are talking about the United States, first and foremost, because the crisis of capitalism is concentrated in the United States. The United States embodies all of the contradictions of the world capitalist system, the conflict between the growth of the international economy, globalization, transnational production, and the national characteristics of the state. Now, the so-called post-war order was set up under American hegemony in the ruins of the Second World War. U.S. imperialism emerged dominant out of the ashes of the major cities of Europe, and it created an international system under its domination. That system is now increasingly breaking down, as seen by the violent eruptions of trade war, protectionism, the crisis in the treasury markets, the crisis in the stock markets, even the very question of whether the dollar will continue to be the reserve currency of the world and whether the United States government will be able to finance its debt. But the basic problem confronting American imperialism is this effort to reorganize the world under its domination. Now, Leon Trotsky, the Russian revolutionary, identified this basic characteristic in the 1930s, even before the period of American hegemony after the Second World War. He explained, U.S. capitalism is up against the same problems that pushed Germany in 1914 on the path of the war. The world is divided, it must be redivided. For Germany, it was a question of organizing Europe. The United States must organize the world. History is bringing humanity face to face with the volcanic eruption of American imperialism. Now, it's a peculiar characteristic of the writings of the great Marxists, and Trotsky certainly was one of the great Marxists, that their analyses tend to become truer in time. Certainly, Trotsky was analyzing characteristics of American imperialism that exist in embryo in his time, but are erupting with violent force in our own time. The fact is that the Holocaust was a critical component of the drive by German imperialism to reorganize Europe. And the Gaza genocide, the promotion of the systematic extermination and ethnic cleansing of an entire population of 2 million people in Gaza, is an inseparable component of the global eruption of American imperialism. And the goal of this discussion will be to present the Gaza genocide in its context and its political significance for the attack on democratic rights in the United States. And certainly Trump has made opponents of the Gaza genocide the central target of his attacks on democratic rights. But as I hope you'll see in this discussion, the promotion of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, of total lawlessness and criminality, in fact expresses the most essential characteristics of the capitalist system that are manifesting themselves in the most brutal and undisguised forms. Now, it is a staple of discussions in the media of the events in Gaza, the war as it's presented in the media, of Israel's war in Gaza, as they call it, that it all started on October 7th, 2023. But of course, this is the central lie of the Gaza genocide. There is an antecedent history. And this antecedent history cannot be understood simply in the Levant, in the Middle East, but is in fact inseparable from the global eruption of American imperialism that went into overdrive beginning in the Gulf War of 1991 and the declaration by the first Bush administration that it would create a new world order of American hegemony. Now, the World Socialist website wrote in 2003, analyzing the outbreak of the Iraq War, the United States interpreted the collapse of the Soviet Union as an opportunity to establish a position of unchallengeable global hegemony. For the first time since 1917, there existed no clear international constraints on the use of American military power to achieve its global objectives. This was the meaning of the declaration by the first President Bush that the demise of the Soviet Union opened the way for the creation of a new world order. Though he did not define precisely what this new world order would be, it would become increasingly clear that the United States intended to exploit the international political vacuum created by the demise of the USSR to reshape a world in accordance with the global interests of American capitalism. Now, on September 11th, 1990, a date with future historical resonance, George H.W. Bush proclaimed the so-called New World Order with the beginning of the First Gulf War.
Iraq's aggression must not be tolerated. No peaceful international order is possible if larger states can devour their smaller neighbors. And we stand today at a unique and extraordinary moment. The crisis in the Persian Gulf, as grave as it is, also offers a rare opportunity to move toward an historic period of cooperation. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge, a new era.
Now, of course, Bush's statements about a new world order were framed in the familiar tropes with which American imperialism promotes its wars. A smaller country is having its sovereignty violated by an aggressor, in this case, Iraq. All of this was a pretext for the invasion and occupation of Iraq aimed at establishing direct U.S. imperialist domination over the Middle East and sending a message to every other imperialist power that the United States is willing to use force to achieve its objectives. Now, this model was used over and over and over again in country after country. The September 11th, 2001 attacks were used as a pretext to massively expand U.S. war-making all over the world, all with the same interests and goals: the domination of the world and of the Middle East by the United States. In fact, the Bush administration was working with a plan, as General Wesley Clark subsequently explained in this clip, to carry out war all over the world against country after country.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a sec." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Now, as part of this eruption of war all over the world, George W. Bush proclaimed a so-called axis of evil, including not just Iraq, but Iran and North Korea.
North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction. Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
These were all the countries that the United States would seek to bomb, occupy, annex, control, dominate. It was part of a global eruption of imperialist war, which went into overdrive after the dissolution of the USSR. As I mentioned, it started with the first Gulf War in 1991. Then, after 2001, the invasion, the second Gulf War, the invasion of Afghanistan, the bombing of Yugoslavia, the destabilization operation in Libya and Syria, which has now continued with the war being waged first by the Biden administration, now under Trump, targeting the total colonial subjugation of the Middle East. Its central target is not only the total ethnic cleansing of Gaza, but ultimately war against Iran, a war which would have the most far-reaching and devastating consequences, and which is potentially only a matter of weeks away. Now, the media presentation of the Gaza genocide, again, is that there is no historical antecedent. There was no plan before October 7th. October 7th was the day that changed everything. But in reality, the actual strategic planning of the Israeli government is based on decades of precedent, using language developed under the Bush administration. In 2006, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice proclaimed what would be the new Middle East with the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. This is what she said.
I have no interest in diplomacy for the sake of returning Lebanon and Israel to the status quo ante. I think it would be a mistake. What we're seeing here, in a sense, is the birth pangs of a new Middle East.
The new Middle East. Now, on October 20th, that's September 20th, 2023, just 2 weeks before the October 7th attacks, Benjamin Netanyahu traveled to the United Nations and gave the following speech.
Peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia will truly create a new Middle East. The whole Middle East changes. We'll build a new corridor of peace and prosperity that connects Asia through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, to Europe.
So, what do you see on this map? What's particular? Let's ask the audience. What do you notice that's peculiar about this map? Exactly. There's no Palestine. This is 2 weeks before October 7th. Apologies for the title, it's miswritten. This is in September 2023, 2 weeks before the events of October 7th, which were used as a pretext to launch exactly this plan, the creation of a new Middle East under Israeli-U.S. domination, in which Israel would annex the Gaza Strip, depopulate it, and throw out its population. In fact, Netanyahu boasted about this plan 1 year later. After the launching of the Gaza genocide, he returned to the United Nations and made these points.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Israel defends itself against Iran in the Seven Front War, the line separating the blessing and the curse could not be more clear. This is the map I presented here last year. It's a map of a blessing. It shows Israel and its Arab partners forming a land bridge connecting Asia and Europe between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Across this bridge, we will lay rail lines, energy pipelines, fiber optic cables, and this will serve the betterment of 2 billion people. Now look at this second map. It's a map. Look at the second map. It's a map of a curse. It's a map of an arc of terror that Iran has created and imposed from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Iran's malignant arc has shut down international waterways. It cuts off trade. It destroys millions, destroys nations from within, and inflicts misery on millions. On the one hand, a bright blessing, a future of hope. On the other hand, a dark future of despair. And if
Now, what does this have to do with the official narrative of October 7th? That all of this started when Hamas in the Gaza Strip carried out an attack on Israel. Clearly, before and after October 7th, the plan was the same, to carry out a reorganization of the Middle East under U.S.-Israeli domination, in which the annexation of the Gaza Strip would be a critical, in fact, the annexation not only of the Gaza Strip, but of the West Bank, would be a critical object of U.S.-Israeli policy, and war against Iran would be on the agenda. This is exactly the policy that has been pursued by the U.S. and Israel over the course of the past year and a half. It has been the policy under two administrations, supported by both the Democrats and the Republicans. Now, of course, the media narrative about October 7th was that it was an unforeseeable, unpredictable attack. No one could have known. Of course, all of the defenses were down because no one could have imagined or foreseen the attack by Hamas on October 7th. But the reality was that Israel was in full possession of Hamas's battle plans for that day. It knew the exact nature of where Hamas planned to attack, the exact points, how it would do it, and even the timing. And ahead of the planned attack, Israel withdrew its security forces away from the Gaza border, turned off its monitoring of intelligence gathering of plans by Hamas, and did everything possible, in fact, to facilitate basically the events that unfolded that day. And in fact, when Israeli forces reconquered the areas that were under Hamas control, they implemented what was called the Hannibal Directive, in which Israeli forces directly killed Israeli citizens that were in the areas that they were attempting to reconquer. And a significant number of Israelis were killed by the Israeli Defense Forces as they rushed into the areas that they moved to occupy. Now, throughout this entire period, the United States has given completely unconditional support to Israel in pursuit of the Gaza genocide. This is a policy but by no means began with Trump. Now, as Israel was carrying out the bombardment and mass killing of the population of Gaza, the White House was asked whether there are any red lines for what it was prepared to tolerate. This was the response.
Is that still the case, that the administration has no red lines at all?
That is still the case.
In late October, you had referred to the fact that the administration is not drawing any red lines for Israel. As the death toll for civilians in the Gaza Strip has gone up, I wanted to ensure, is that still the case, that the administration has no red lines at all?
That is still the case.
No red lines. Biden was asked a month later whether he would support a ceasefire in Gaza. He replied no.
What are the chances of a Gaza ceasefire? No possibility.
No possibility. Biden wanted Israel to achieve its war aims, which it was clear even then included the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. Biden claimed that he actually didn't support either genocide or ethnic cleansing, but in reality, that was the actual policy that the Netanyahu government was carrying out with the support of the Biden administration, with the weapons provided by the Biden administration. Now, many people think, when you ask, what is the position of Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez on Gaza? They'll say that they criticize the Gaza genocide. All of this is a fraud. Both Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez fully supported the conduct of Israel's attack on Gaza over the course of the initial months, opposed the ceasefire, repeatedly voted to provide arms for Israel, Here's an example of what Bernie Sanders said. I want to start with Sanders on the question of a ceasefire in November of 2023.
I don't know how you could have a permanent ceasefire with Hamas, who has said before October 7th and after October 7th that they want to destroy Israel. They want a permanent war. I don't know how you have a permanent ceasefire with an attitude like that.
Okay, so the war you're saying against Hamas is justified in that way.
I think Israel has the right to defend itself and to go after Hamas.
Israel has the right to defend itself. Here's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on March 6th, 2024.
When we discuss support for Israeli defense systems, that is absolutely legitimate. I think it is absolutely something that whose support we can.
So you would vote yes today if it came to the United States Congress, additional funding for the Iron Dome?
On the sole principle of Iron Dome and defense, I absolutely think there's an openness for sure.
So let's just take a minute to address this claim that Israel has the right to defend itself against the Palestinian people. And the fact is, it does not. Because Israel illegally occupied Gaza and the West Bank in 1967, and for decades has illegally occupied them. It is an illegal occupying force in defiance of international law, in defiance of vote after vote in the United Nations. Gaza is an area illegally occupied by Israel. So the claim that Israel has the right to defend itself against a population that it illegally occupies is a complete fraud. It's a lie. Now, what is it that Israel is doing in Gaza? Is it appropriate, as this meeting, the leaflet for this meeting, and demonstrations against the events in Gaza have called it a genocide? Is this an inappropriate use of the term? In reality, by all official definitions of what a genocide is, according to the definitions of the Rome Statute, genocide includes specific acts and specific states of mind. The acts include killing members of the group. At the time, this is an article from the World Socialist website. At the time, 20,000 people in Gaza had been killed. Now the official death toll is 50,000. The real death toll is probably closer to 70, 80, 90,000. Causing serious bodily or mentally harm to members of the group. Hundreds of thousands of Gazans have been injured. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And in fact, everything about the conduct of the war is consistent with this definition of genocide. Every water treatment facility is shut down. Every granary is shut down. No food gets into Gaza. Every hospital has come under attack. Medical workers, recovery workers have been attacked. Humanitarian workers have been attacked. By action, all the definitions of genocide are met. But the crime of genocide has a mental component as well. It has what is called in the legal profession mens rea, state of mind. And what is unique about the Gaza genocide is that its perpetrators have stated their genocidal intent over and over and over again. Benjamin Netanyahu declared, "Remember what Amalek has done to you," citing the biblical passage or invoking the biblical passage that commands to put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. The declaration by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant that we are fighting human animals and are acting accordingly. The declaration by Avi Dichter, the agriculture minister, that we're rolling out the Gaza Nakba. The declaration over and over that the goal of the Israeli war is the displacement of the Palestinian people. The declaration by the former head of the Israeli National Security Council that severe epidemics in the south of Gaza will bring victory closer. All of these are statements of genocidal intent coupled with genocidal action. Who is implicated in this genocide? It's the Biden administration that provided the bombs, and it's every member of the Democratic Party which has provided political cover for these crimes. Certainly, Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez, who explicitly justified the war. But in fact, all of the figures that endorsed Biden, that said that this figure would somehow, represent a kinder, gentler version of American imperialism, all of them have been shown to be complicit in this genocide. Now, while the entire political establishment is implicated in the genocide, millions of people have protested against it all over the world, in mass protests in every major city. But the response of the ruling class in the United States and internationally is to meet these demonstrations protesting a war crime, a crime against international law, in fact, a crime against American law by the laws that are on the books. These demonstrations have been met with police repression, mass expulsions at universities, the withdrawing of visas, accompanied by the snatching up of students in their homes, on the streets, their disappearance to what are in fact internment camps in Louisiana and elsewhere. But the fact is, things have gotten so far under the Trump administration only because the stage was set under Biden. In March of 2024, we pointed to the significance of the new disciplinary policy implemented at the University of Michigan, which set a standard to be applied nationwide. It presented a contrast between the expression of democratic rights, or the expression of free speech, and the ability of students to live their lives and their academic careers free from disruption. But of course, as we pointed out, this argument was the stock and trade of every dictatorship that ever existed throughout the 20th century and the 21st. And there have been multiple human rights bodies that have taken up exactly this argument. Private entities, this is the United Nations Human Rights Committee, private entities and broader society may be expected to accept some level of disruption if this is required for the exercise of the right of peaceful assembly. That is, on the basis of the standard precedents of democratic rights, you may be slightly inconvenienced by other people speaking their minds. But the fact is that the ability of other people to speak their minds takes precedence over this or that other person's ability to not be troubled by other people speaking their minds. And this is the precedent that was rejected under Biden, with the complicity of university administrations, with the complicity of state governors throughout 2024. In April, the Biden administration launched a crackdown on college campuses, carrying out mass assaults on encampments of students protesting the Gaza genocide. And then in May, Biden made this declaration, echoing the very words of the new disciplinary policy at the University of Michigan.
But dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education.
Dissent must never lead to disorder. What does that mean? That means that the expression of freedom of speech, the ability of people to protest criminal activity by the American government, must be measured against the freedom of defenders of the Gaza genocide to not see people protesting. That's what that argument is. And now, this argument is being used by the Trump administration to carry out the systematic, not only arrest, but disappearing of opponents of the Gaza genocide. Hundreds of students have had their visas revoked. Mahmoud Khalil has been arrested, grabbed, basically disappeared, put into a detention facility in Louisiana. Mamadou Tal at Cornell University has been forced to leave the country. under conditions in which he faced the threat of being put into one of these black sites, basically snatched off the street. Now, under conditions of this massive attack on democratic rights being carried out by the Trump administration, what can only be called the final solution of the Palestinian question is being implemented by Netanyahu and Trump. And Trump was very clear. The difference primarily between Biden and Trump on their policy on the Gaza genocide is that Biden lied about what the actual policy was. Biden claimed that he was seeking a two-state solution. Biden wanted a homeland for the Palestinian people. Of course, the Netanyahu government, in multiple statements by Israeli officials, said, no, this is not the case. We're rolling out the Gaza Nakba. We want to ethnically cleanse Gaza and, in fact, all of Palestine. Trump, however, openly states what the policy is. The policy is ethnic cleansing. The policy is the displacement of the Palestinian people. The policy is the annexation of what Trump sees as prime oceanside real estate. It's going to be plowed over. All of the bodies, all of the hospitals, all of the schools that have been destroyed are just going to be plowed under the rubble, and there will be casinos built on top of it. That's the program of American imperialism, and that's the actual program that's being put into effect. The American media continues to deny what is actually taking place. The fact is that this is a policy that's being actively implemented, not only in the systematic blockade of food, water, electricity, medical supplies, but in constant daily mass killings of dozens of people, as many as 400 people killed in a single day last month. On March 23rd, 15 aid workers were systematically killed by Israeli forces. Their bodies and their emergency vehicles were plowed under in a mass grave. It systematically emerged, or subsequently emerged, that many of them had their hands tied. They were shot at point-blank range multiple times. This was a mass summary execution. And this type of thing is happening month after month in Gaza with the support of American imperialism, with the support of both the Democratic and Republican parties. Israel has put into place plans for, and in fact, a bureau for the so-called voluntary relocation of the population of Gaza, and of course, under conditions in which the entire population is being starved to death, there is no such thing as voluntary relocation. This is forced relocation. The machinery for the mass deportation of the population of Gaza is being put into place, and the critical component of this is now happening, the final assault to occupy all of Gaza, put it under military rule, displace internally the remaining population in preparation for their forced dispersal either overseas or inland into the Sinai Desert, perhaps to Madagascar, who knows? And of course, we know that the Nazi Madagascar plan, which was a plan to take the Jews of Europe and transport them to Madagascar, proved to be impractical. And in fact, the final solution of what Hitler called the Jewish question was the mass extermination of Europe's Jews, the killing of over 6 million people. In fact, this is the logic of the ethnic cleansing that is now taking place in Gaza with the support of the entire U.S. political establishment, in which the imperialist powers of Europe are complicit. Now, the Gaza genocide is a critical component of the drive by American imperialism to reorganize the entire Middle East. And in fact, as we speak, American military assets are steaming towards the Middle East. Within striking distance of Iran, there's now 1/3 of the US's B-2 stealth bombers are stationed. There are now 2 aircraft carriers within striking distance of Iran. And Trump has said, if Iran does not accept the United States terms, there will be bombing. That is the great goal of the Bush administration, the declaration that real men, boys go to Baghdad and real men go to Tehran. is on the verge of being actualized in a massive military attack on Iran that will blow up the entire region and risks drawing in Russia, China, and the entire world in a global conflict. Now, the Democrats are absolutely complicit in not only the Gaza genocide, but in Trump's attacks on democratic rights and the social rights of the working class. Elissa Slotkin, the former CIA agent, was tasked with giving the official Democratic response to Trump's State of the Union address. This is what she said.
I was recruited by the CIA and did 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military. In between, I worked at the White House under President Bush and President Obama, 2 very different leaders who both believed that America is exceptional. We need a more efficient government. You want to cut waste? I'll help you do it. After the spectacle that just took place in the Oval Office last week, Reagan must be rolling in his grave. Trump would have lost us the Cold War. He sees American leadership as merely a series of real estate transactions. He clearly doesn't think we should lead the world.
This is the critique, the official response of the Democratic Party under conditions in which Trump has declared that he will be a dictator on day one, as he's carrying out the disappearances of students for expressing their First Amendment rights, as he's attacking Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The declaration of the Democratic Party is that Trump is not sufficiently aggressive in the pursuit of American military hegemony, war with Russia, and it declares its willingness to work with Trump to attack the social and democratic rights of the working class. And in fact, the Senate has just overwhelmingly voted to remove all restrictions on the sending of military aid to Israel, moving forward another $8 billion in weapons. Now, a final word has to be said about the Democratic Socialists of America, which is the organization that endorsed both Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Joe Biden. Jacobin Magazine, the official publication of the Democratic Socialists of America, had an article that it published last week in which it praised alleged protests by hundreds of people against Hamas that took place in Israel, in words indistinguishable from neoconservative columnist Bret Stephens. And it declared that genocide is Israel's vengeance for October 7th. Now, the genocide in Gaza is not the vengeance of Israel for resistance by the Palestinian people. It is part of a systematic, planned campaign by U.S. imperialism to dominate the Middle East as part of an eruption of imperialist war all over the world. Now, what is the economic basis of the eruption of this global war? The American share of the world economy, the United States share of the world economy has continuously declined since World War II. China, by many measures, has already eclipsed the United States in economic output. There is a continual reduction in and worsening of the U.S. balance of trade, both under Obama, Biden, Trump, whatever protectionist measures these administrations have sought to carry out. The balance of trade continues to become increasingly unfavorable. The federal deficit is growing, fueled by continual bank bailouts, perpetual wars. And as we saw in the Treasury markets yesterday, the question of whether American capitalism and the American government will be able to finance its debts is in fact an open question. American imperialism confronts a crisis. And that crisis is what is driving the Trump administration to lash out. It's driving the trade war and protectionist measures. It's driving its threats of war against China, against Iraq. It's driving its threats to annex Greenland, the Panama Canal. It sees through military violence the means by which to shore up its global hegemony. This graphic was presented in the book The Strategy of Denial by Elbridge Colby, who just got confirmed as Undersecretary of Defense for Planning. And it basically presents a contrast between the distribution of global economic power, in which China has in many respects already eclipsed the United States, and global military power, where the United States remains the world's hegemon. It argues that the United States must use this military power to secure its global hegemony, and it must go to any lengths. More and more the publications of American imperialism, the foreign policy journals, are speaking of total war, which mobilizes all of the resources in society. Who would this total war be fought against? It would be fought against Russia, China, potentially involving the conscription of young people, the mobilization of all of society's resources. And in fact, the Trump administration, although demagogically invoking the threat of World War III, is making preparations for such a far-reaching war targeting China. Now, the Gaza genocide is a critical component of this effort by American imperialism to shore up its declining hegemony through military violence. Trump has declared the intent to seize colonies all over the world: Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal, and finally, Gaza would be an American colony which the United States would seek to dominate in order to shore up its increasingly flagging economic position. And this is being spoken of increasingly openly. Why does the Trump administration want to annex Greenland? This is Mike Waltz, his deputy national security advisor, making it clear what is at stake. Of course, this is at the time Los Angeles was burning, so as he's talking about the conquest of Greenland, you're seeing scenes of an inferno in Los Angeles, which is appropriate. But this is what he said.
This is not just about Greenland. This is about the Arctic. You have Russia that is trying to become king of the Arctic with 60 plus icebreakers, some of them nuclear powered. You know how many we have, Jesse? We have 2, and 1 just caught on fire. This is about critical minerals. This is about natural resources. This is about, as the polar ice caps pull back, the Chinese are now cranking out icebreakers and pushing up there as well. So it's oil and gas, it's our national security, it's critical minerals.
Oil and gas, national security, critical minerals. The United States is seeking to dominate all of the critical choke points of the global economy. Greenland is critical for the so-called Northern Sea Route. As the polar ice caps melt, there will be the ability to have trade over this Northern Sea Route. It's seeking to dominate the Suez Canal, of which control over the Middle East is absolutely critical. And of course, the Panama Canal is planned for annexation by the Trump administration. It is seeking, through military means, to control all of the choke points of the global economy, to counteract the economic decline of American imperialism through military means. Now, this is accompanied by a systematic assault on the social position of the working class. Trump has declared that the United States will have the lowest tax rates on corporations anywhere in the world. He is determined to continue the continued immiseration and impoverishment of the working class that has been carried out under Biden, the first Trump presidency, Obama, and in fact over the course of decades. He is determined to entrench the rule of the financial oligarchy and ensure that it is not the oligarchs that pay for the crisis of capitalism, but it is the working class. This administration has declared war on Social Security, on key social programs. Day after day, the website of the Social Security Administration is crashing. Older people are not receiving their Social Security checks. They have nowhere to call when problems arise. It's death by 1,000 cuts. The American ruling class sees Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid as a giant pool of social resources to raid, to pay their bad debts in order to cover their losses from their speculative activities. Now, the fact is that the working class will enter into struggle in opposition to the Trump administration. There has been, over recent years, a global wave of strikes and struggles. strikes in the auto industry, and logistics in the United States and around the world. And the central question is, as we explained in 2014, which will develop more quickly, the tendency towards war or the tendency towards social revolution, the barbarism of the ruling class and its social system, or the independent political mobilization of the working class? The answer to this question will be determined in the realm of politics. Now, last weekend, we saw mass demonstrations by millions of people in opposition to the Trump administration. There is no shortage of willingness to fight. There is no shortage of opposition to the policies of this government and the policies of the American financial oligarchy. What is critically necessary and missing up to this point is conscious political leadership. As we explained in a statement published on April 7th, while the outpouring of opposition revealed the deep hostility to Trump and the capitalist system he represents, the movement that took to the streets on April 5th remains at an early stage. As of yet, it lacks a clear political program and organizational expression. The working class has not intervened in the situation as an independent and conscious force. Under conditions in which the union apparatus supports Trump and the Democratic Party offers no real opposition, the emergence of mass resistance has taken an initial and largely spontaneous form. However, this very spontaneity underscores the urgency of political clarification. The working class must be armed with an understanding of the real nature of fascism, not as an individual aberration, but as the product of the historic breakdown of the capitalist system. The enemy is not only Trump and the Republicans, but the entire capitalist state, including the Democratic Party, the union bureaucracy, and the financial oligarchy that rules America. And I'll conclude with this. There's the famous book by Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here, about a hypothetical fascist dictatorship in the United States in the 1930s. And there were very powerful fascist tendencies in the United States at that time. Certainly the Nazis cited Henry Ford as an inspiration for their racial theories. And these tendencies were quite powerful in the United States. Ultimately, American imperialism was able to maintain, more or less, the veneer of democratic forms of government. That was a very different period. American imperialism was the wealthiest imperialist power anywhere in the world. It was the uncontested global hegemon, especially after World War II. That period is over. Trump made a very interesting statement the other day. He was speaking with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu was giving Trump an update on the genocide, and he was asked about his trade war measures, and he said, "We're very rich, but we're very rich in a certain way. We have $36 trillion of debt," which is it's very rich in debt. In other words, American imperialism is bankrupt. It is a ruling class that is desperate and willing to take the most desperate measures. It is seeking to set up a dictatorship. It is willing to go to war. It is willing, in fact, even to use nuclear weapons. The belief that it can't happen here, that a dictatorship that kills millions of people, that snatches people off the street in their homes just for expressing their opinion, can't be established in the United States, has been dispelled. This is the active program of the Trump administration. And it is critical to draw the lessons. What is at stake? This is a time for serious politics. And serious politics is historically grounded politics. It's politics based on an understanding of the fundamental lessons of history. And the fundamental lesson of history, the fundamental lesson of the 20th century and the 21st, is that the only way to oppose dictatorship and war is through the building of a mass movement in the working class. Students who are under attack at universities, who are being expelled, who are being having their visas denied, are being arrested en masse, have to turn to the power of the factories. They have to turn to the workers who are being systematically impoverished, attacked, whose living standards in the next 2 months are going to plummet as the cost of consumer durables doubles. What is going to happen to the living standards of these factory workers? What is going to happen to the living standards of their parents and grandparents as they're told, no, sorry, you're not getting your Social Security check. You're going to have to figure it out how you're going to pay rent and pay for your groceries. There will be shocks in store in the coming months. This is not a hypothetical or notional idea of sometime in the future. There will be immense struggles. And the most important question, the most important task, is the study of history and the serious study of politics, the history of the revolutionary movement, of the Marxist movement. Simple solutions are not enough. And I would urge all of you to seriously consider joining the International Youth and Students for Social Equality and studying the critical works of Marxism. Thank you.